Hey there everybody, my name is Tom Delia of MTG Radio, and today I'm going to be doing a little bit of a more special video, I guess a more specialized video. A common question I get asked, especially from either newer players, even experienced players, is how do I build, tweak, or improve an EDH deck? And today I kind of want to go over how I personally build an EDH deck, and this will just be a literal deck build of an EDH deck, maybe even two. But I really feel there are two specific ways to build an EDH deck. There's one from the feet up and then from the head down. And what I mean by that is that you can either take a general, like let's go with a new general from the new commander product, like Rune of the Hidden Realms, and then build from him, or you can take a strategy. Let's say you want to build, I don't know, let's go with a tribal archetype like elves. Let's say you want to build an elf deck, very common tribe to build around. Start off with a good old Arbor Elf. But you just want to play EDH with an elf deck. A lot of people love elves, a lot of people's favorite tribes. One of the other ways to build it, besides going once again from the ground up with a deck like from the general down like Rune, is from the ground up with a strategy like tribal elves, and then attaching a general or fixing one to the top of it. Right now, I feel like let's start with the popular commander, and then we'll go to a simpler strategy. But before we even do that, let's talk about the differences between the two strategies and how you should choose to build your EDH deck. First of all, it's your darn EDH deck. Build it how you want to. That's probably going to be the most important thing to get down before we even start. I'll be doing these builds directly on Magic: The Gathering Online. I actually think MTGO is a great deck building tool. It's gather at your fingertips, and I'll show you a little bit on how to use the UI to really make sure you find exactly what you want when you're looking through your cards. So the first thing is, why would you want to go for a general director strategy versus a strategy up? Why do you want to go general down or strategy up? So, especially if you're new to EDH, I would actually really suggest taking one of these two paths. They're forking paths, each one go a different way. But when going from strategy up, you usually take this path when you know you love to do something in Commander, or you love to do something in just regular old Magic. A good example is, hey, I love elves, I love what they do. They produce a lot of mana, you can put a lot on the battlefield, you can build the classic elf ball version of a deck. In that case, then, you might want to go strategy up and build an elf deck and then affix a commander on top, kind of like you're building the entire Christmas tree and you're putting a beautiful little ornament right on top that interacts with it. Now, the thing about a strategy up deck build is that the cards that revolve around it are kind of easy. You'll notice, especially if we're going to be doing a tribal deck, literally all you do is you type elf in here. Hey, look, our deck's built. No, I'm just kidding. But when you go strategy up, it is very simple, especially if you're newer to Magic in general, or especially if you're newer to EDH, to really go from strategy up. Now, if you want to go commander down, this is probably a more advanced strategy. So let's take a card like Rune of the Hidden Realms. 2 green, white, blue for a legendary Rhino Soldier. He's a 4/4 with Vigilance and Trample. Then for 2 mana, you can tap him to exile another target creature, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. And now the cool part about Rune is that he does leave a little bit of interplay, a little bit of choices on which way you want to go. I would suggest doing an enter the battlefield and leave the battlefield strategy, really focusing a lot on some of the elementals from Lorwyn and Morningtide, but also shifting forward to a lot of the cards from Avacyn Restored that also interact very well with blinking effects. We're going to do both. But first we're going to go with general down, because actually let's go strategy up first. Strategy up should be really good. So the first thing is, what kind of strategy do you want? I said we're going to go tribal elves, which is always a good idea, but that doesn't mean you should break your normal deck building constraints. One of the first things you want to really focus on is lands. Lands are super, super, super important. I stress this heavily every single time I go over somebody else's EDH deck, but especially when going over my own. You need lands. Even in an elf deck, we're probably going to be playing 38 lands, but we'll say 39, so that we're looking to put 60 cards into our EDH deck. Now, 10 of those should be mana fixing, but since we're going to be going with elves, that's going to be pretty simple. So I'm going to move the sideboard down and building your deck. Because we are going to be going strategy up, the commander is the last thing we're going to pick out, which is the opposite of the other version, where we go commander first. So when looking at elves, especially with the tribal archetype, we want a lot of cards that actually interact with the elf tribe. Now, since we are going to be using MTGO, the first thing I want you to do, you're going to see these 6 little dots up here. Now, what's really cool about MTGO is you can click them to either select or deselect a certain color. And also, the quick way is if you right-click one of those buttons, you'll only select that color. So you'll notice cards like Blood Red Elf disappeared because I want to be going mono green elves. Now if I want to be going mono green elves, I really want to focus on cards like this, which they just get bigger the more elves you have in play. Now there's two different ways to take this. By typing in elf, it's going to search out all of the creatures that I have that have the creature type elf in their ability. Now if you're newer to MTG or if you're newer to Commander in general, you might not have that many elves or you might not have all the cards you're looking for. You'll see this little checkbox that says my cards. Now when you select that checkbox, boom, every single elf in existence that is currently on MTGO or just in existence ever will come up. You'll see cards like a full art Bramblewood Paragon, alternate art Allosaurus Riders, heck, even Deathrise Shaman all appear here. Now there are two different ways to take an elf deck. You can go blue-green elves or regular green elves or green-red. Okay, there's a lot of different ways to take elf decks. We're just going to go for the basic mono green just to sort of show how this deck works. Now, since I want to be building an elf deck, it's kind of simple. It goes pretty quickly. We're going to scroll down. Basically what I'm going to do from here on is I will just use my cards right now. I think I've already built an elf deck, so there's nothing. Actually, yeah, let's just keep it on this route. You'll notice there's an infinite amount because I do not own an infinite amount of Ambassador Oaks. So when looking through a deck like a tribal elf deck, I do like the ability to untap target forest, especially with a card like Arbor Elf. That being said, it's not that important. What I'm really looking for when I look at this deck are either ways to interact with multiple elves in the battlefield or creatures that really get very powerful with a lot of cards on the battlefield. Now, I wouldn't mind playing this Bramblewood Paragon, except we're not really going for the warrior sub-theme, so it's not that important. Now, with elves, one of the things I do want to do is make sure I have the capacity to have extra lands on the battlefield. Civic Wayfarer allows me to do that, which is fantastic. You'll notice some of these cards come with a little red lettering. That indicates I don't actually own this card. That's only because I don't own this version of the card. Once again, we are using MTGO, so it will do that to us. I'm also going to unclick... no, I'm going to leave this clicked. So I'm going to unclick this silver. This indicates colorless cards, but I am going to click the lands button so that it doesn't show me lands. This way I'll be able to grab any sort of artifact creature elves that'll let us destroy enchantments. This will be important when it comes as we go further down, of course. Now, when playing EDH, one of the things you really want to make sure you're able to really quantify, or make sure you're really able to get, are cards that have impactful end of the battlefield abilities, or just cards that have impactful abilities when they leave play, or even when they're in play. So a card like Deranged Hermit is actually very good. It's a 5-mana 1/1, which looks horrible, but it puts 4 1/1 squirrels into play, and those squirrels get +1/+1. Although we're not going to be a squirrel deck, in this deck we will be playing a lot of cards that pump multiple creatures. That's going to be one of the things we get at the end of this deck building video. So Deranged Hermit's going to be great. Even though it doesn't build elves, it is going to build a lot of squirrels for us to trample over our opponents. Now, as I go down, I am going to pay attention to Legendary Elves. A Legendary Elf is probably one of the best ways to really cap an elf deck, but as you know, we are going to be going from the ground up, strategy up. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take our generals that we may play, and I'm going to put it in this sideboard area. When you build an EDH deck online, your EDH general does have to go into the sideboard area. So I'm going to put Eladamri, Lord of Lees here, double green for a 2/2. Other elves have Forest Walk and other elves have Shroud. Actually a very, very, very powerful card. Just not a card you want to play with a card like Imperial Magistrate. Now looking at Elvish Aberration, the reason why I'm at where we are going to play this card is because of the Forest Cycling ability. Now what you're going to see me do, especially as we go down, is I'm just going to keep pulling cards in, and I'll mention the ones that I really have the ability to, but if I miss one or don't go over it, I will be including the deck list in the video so you can check it out. But two of the ones that we pull almost immediately are Elvish Archdruid and Elvish Champion. So this is an amazing looking Elvish Champion, but both of these creatures give other elves we control +1/+1. This one gives all other elves +1/+1 and have Forest Walk. This one just gives that +1/+1 and the ability to add extra green to our mana pool. Both fantastic. Now the reason why I wanted to use Elf here is because not only will it hit creature types, but it will also hit enchantments that interact directly with elves. So the cool card like Elvish Guidance, which whenever a channel land is tapped for mana to add green to his mana pool for each elf on the battlefield, will be pulled because it says Elf. Now Elvish Harbinger is not Harbinger, which I always think it's Harbinger, but Harbinger is a card we do want to play because it's going to tutor up the exact elf we need in any sort of situation, which is very powerful. Now, when looking at our deck, I don't really want to play too many of these Elvish Mystic type effects or Llanowar Elf type effects because we're going to be playing a deck that plays a lot of low CMC creatures. I'm going to convert a mana cost sort. We already have 4 3-drops, and it's just this part of the curve is going to increase rapidly. Additionally, a card like Elvish Piper isn't that important. Our creatures are very low cost, so even though this card is impactful in a bigger Naya deck, I really don't want to play in this type of deck. So we are going to play Elvish Promenade. Elvish Promenade going to put a 1/1 green elf warrior into play for each elf we control. This is the type of deck. This is the type of deck that's going to take a really big advantage of it, because get this. Most, if not all, of our creatures are going to be elves. Now, I really do like Elvish Skysweeper. We're going to put him in here. I'm not very sure if he's going to go in. The ability to just destroy creatures with flying is very impactful, especially for a 1-drop. Now, Elvish Soul Tiller is actually a pretty cool card. It's a 5-mana 5/4, which actually trades very well. But the cool part is, since we aren't, it'll actually be able to put cards back into our library, which is pretty powerful. Elvish Vanguard's a cool spell. It's from one of the tribal sets. The problem with it is, as far as what I've found, is that you don't really get a big impact off of him quickly. I am going to put him into the deck right now, but I don't expect him to stay. The reason why he just usually underperforms in this type of deck is because, unlike a card like Elvish Visionary that enters the battlefield and draws a card, he has to stay on the battlefield and keep going to get better. And unless we're going to be playing cards that consistently put out multiple tokens, not only does this guy not have trample to begin with, but he just starts so small that usually the card isn't worth the ability. Now, the Courier is actually pretty cool. You can give a creature +2/+2 and trample when it taps. The problem is leaving up 3 mana is actually pretty difficult for us. Instead, we can play a card like Azuri, which we're going to put him into our sideboard right now, but he's probably going to stay in for Overrun mana, 2 triple green, elf creatures we control, get +3/+3 and trample. Amazingly impactful ability, definitely coming in. We are going to put Finthorn Elves into here. We're probably not going to be playing them, going to be honest with you, but might as well look at them. I do like Farhaven Elf. Once again, we do have a lot of abilities to give us extra lands, these cards, Elvish Archdruid, but Finthorn Elf really succeeds at putting lands into the battlefield, which is just harder for your opponents to get off the battlefield. The last thing you want to do is have a field filled with elves that ramp your mana, and then all of a sudden your opponent comes along Wrath and you're down to 4 lands. That sucks. Fauna Shaman is going to be a great card for this deck. It's a survival ability on an elf. We can tutor up the elf and then tutor up more elves. It just gets better from there. Now, looking at our current board, Gaia's Herald's actually just, first of all, the art's amazing. Let's get that part out of the way. But secondly, the card is decent but not great. This is another card that I'm going to look at heavily before I finish the deck. Guiltleaf Archdruid is a very interesting elf, but you really need a bunch of druids in your deck, and we don't have many druids yet. So he's probably not going to hit the field. Guiltleaf Ambush, also very good if you want to go for the elf token route. We might end up that way, so we're going to keep this here. Glissa is a card I love in elf decks just because of her utility. The ability to destroy artifacts and enchantments, artifacts just by floating mana is really powerful. Now that Mana Burn doesn't exist anymore, which it did when she was printed, Glissa is so much better. Speaking of so much better, I really love Immaculate Magistrate. 3 and a green and tap it to put a +1 counter on target creature for each elf you control. This is a card that can get insane. It's like a permanent Timberwatch elf, which is why it costs an extra green. Card is very, very, very good and very powerful. I also like Gyre Sage. The benefit of Gyre Sage over a card like Elvish Mystic is apparent. First of all, it just gets bigger as it keeps going. But secondly, the ability to tap for mythic amounts of mana is amazing, especially with our Immaculate Magistrate. Putting extra utility in your deck is always a good idea. Green Seeker is a very interesting card, except the problem is it puts it into your hand, and we don't really have many cards to discard, especially since we'd be discarding lands to get lands. It's not what we're looking for. Now, Green Seeker is actually a really cool card if you're going for a dredge strategy. I really think it's underutilized just because people don't know it exists. Heart Warden is the kind of card I'd rather play over a card like Arbor Elf, because we can always sacrifice it from the battlefield to cycle it, which is great. Heedless One needs to go into any elf deck, just because it's an amazing elf avatar, but mostly because it has trample. Our elves are going to get big, but a lot of them don't have trample. Headless One has trample. Heritage Druid, very good in an Elf Ball EDH deck, or an Elf Ball, really, standard deck. In this deck, it's going to be pretty lackluster, so we're going to leave Heritage Druid to the left. Hunting Triad's going to be perfect. We're going to be playing a lot of ways to ramp up our elves. Cards like Draugr Ward Caller, Immaculate Magistrate, Imperious Perfect. So being able to put 3 elves into play is great. Also, we can reinforce, which for 3 and a green is going to put 3+1/+1 counters onto a creature, which can randomly win combat for us and may be incredibly important. So that's always something to keep in mind. We are going to put in Imperious Perfect, of course. Probably not the full art version because I don't own this, but hey, to each their own. Going to give all our elves +1/+1 and make elves. Exactly what we're looking for. Ivory Denizen's a cool idea, except it suffers the same problem as Elvish Vanguard. It takes too long for it to really get going. So we're going to leave him in in the long list. Now, Dagger's Archer is actually pretty cool, and a card I like, again, for that utility aspect. 1 double green, its power and toughness are also equal to the number of elves you control, just like Heedless one. But you can tap it to deal damage equal to its power to our creature with flying. It'll let you get a lot of those silly, pesky flyers out of the air, which is perfect. Draugr Chief Speaker will hit the deck. It just does more than a card like Elvish Mystic or Arbor Elf, and Draugr Warcaller especially. Warcaller for a single green, it's multi-kicker, an ability from our Zendikar plane. We can pay 1 in a green as many times as we want it to him, and other elf creatures get +1/+1 for each +1/+1 counter on Draugr Warcaller. Now here's the thing about Warcaller. It cares about +1/+1 counters. This is another way we can really interact with it. With our Immaculate Magistrate. We can put +1/+1 counters under Draugr Warcaller, basically give that ability to everybody else. We're also going to play Kesa. It's going to give all green creatures +1/+1. We're looking to play a lot, and I mean a lot, as you can tell, of ways to make our creatures bigger. So we're going to keep on doing that. It just costs Sorted to double check, and look at our 1 and 2 drops. It's frankly beautiful. Now, as we keep going, Croson Drover is a type of card that's not built for our deck, but Mass Admirers is. I love some Mass Admirers. 2 double green for a 3/2 enters the battlefield, draw a card. The body isn't really sizable, but just like our Elvish Visionary, it's a great card to get off of Fauna Shaman and to keep the deck going, keep a lot of velocity in it. We're playing a lot of low cost creatures, so we need a lot of ways to draw cards and keep going in this type of build. Even if we are playing a tribal strategy, we need ways to keep abreast of those Grixis control decks and make sure they just don't destroy us immediately. Another reason why I really do like going with MTGO and building these type of decks is that a lot of cards I didn't even know exist just kind of pop up. Like, I know Kesa existed, I forgot it was an elf. That's really important for a lot of builds. Now, as we continue to look through, Lissalana Huntmaster is probably one of the best spells in an elf deck. Whenever you cast an elf spell, you may put a +1/+1 counter onto the battlefield. Now, when we look at Drove of Elves, you'll notice that it's an elf, but when you look at Hunting Triad, one of the cool parts about the Morningtide spells is they were tribal sorceries, tribal another card type. Because of the tribal sorcery elf, when we cast it, we get bonus elves with Lissalana Huntmaster. Now, a card that's great in Legacy isn't great in EDH. Nettle Sentinel is a great example of this. For a single green, it doesn't untap during our untap step, but it's a 2/2 elf. Whenever we cast a green spell, we untap Nettle Sentinel. The problem is in EDH, it just untaps, and that's really not that great. Instead, I'd rather play a card like Multani Acolyte. Double green, 2/1, enters the battlefield, draw a card. Even if it has that Echo ability, being able to draw cards in this type of deck is still very powerful. And we could turn this into a 4/3, 5/4 really easily, so it comes in, actually. Now, Nisra Vane, Planeswalkers are just as good in EDH as they are in Cube, and this is one that I actually really do like. It has this really cool Well-Wisher ability on its second +1, and if we're playing Nisra Vane, you do need to play Nisra's Chosen, just so that you can protect her with her, which is great. And if you look, she's actually at the top heavier part of our curve, which means she gets protected more often than not. Null Mage Shepherd is a card that does not see near enough play. 3 and a green, tap 4 and tap creatures you control, destroy target artifact or enchantment. We already have that Glissa, which hits artifacts. Now we can put a 2/4 into our deck that hits enchantments as well, which is perfect for a deck that dies to moat. You'll see we also have an Oracle Moldiah. This is a card that I love just in any deck, but especially in this deck. We need the ability to play those extra lands. We don't want to draw lands in this deck. Oracle Moldiah usually lets us not draw those lands, which is perfect. Oracle Nectar is a card we can't play because of the hybrid symbol. It does have white in this card, and because our commander is going to be mono green, Oracle Nectar is not a card we'll be able to play. A card we will be able to play, and that we will play, is actually Priest of Titania. Priest of Titania for 1 and a green, taps that green to her mana pool for each elf on the battlefield. This is the type of ability that we're looking for. That's the reason we're playing Tree Speaker and why we're playing a card like Gyre Sage. Being able to make this much mana so quickly is just super powerful. Lets us pump a lot through Azuri, lets us make a huge Draugr Warcaller. There's just a lot of benefit to having access to that much mana that quickly. Now, as we go, we're going to be passing a lot of cards that are, again, great in Legacy, but just not great in EDH. One of those cards is not Rafellos. Rafellos is amazing in EDH. Banned as a commander because it was too strong, and it's going to be just as strong in this deck. You'll also notice we have 36 creatures in our deck, and we already have 40 cards in. We are going to be going over the limit. We aren't going to be stopping at 60. One of the ways to have the most fun in EDH, especially when deck building, is cutting cards. I love cutting cards in EDH. So we will be going over the 60 just to make sure we don't miss anything, and then we'll really get into the nitty-gritty. Some of those cards that we talked about that might not be that great may actually get taken out of the deck. As we keep going, Sylvan Messenger is part of the Messenger cycle. Well, they aren't Messengers, all of them, but each one does the same ability. 3 and a green for a 2/2 with Trample. Whenever it's a battlefield, reveal a top 4 card of your library, put Elves this way into your hand. Fantastic spell. Speaking of fantastic, gotta talk about Skyshroud Poacher. 2 double green for a Human Rebel. For 3 mana, you can tap it to search your library for an Elf permanent card to put onto the battlefield and shuffle your library. just so amazing. Love this spell. Instant kill when you see it out of an elf deck. You cannot, I repeat, cannot let this live if you're playing against it. If you're playing it, do anything you can to let it stay, because you just basically win the game. You find the elf you need for any sort of situation. Talari's Battalion is a cute card. It's a 4/3 for 2, but it can only be cast if you play another green spell. The problem is, it's just a 4/3 for 2. Even if you do get that cool, haha, got Talari's Battalion, your opponent just kills it, so it's not really that important. Zero Preserver saw a lot more play when the Eldrazi were really wrecking the format. Nowadays, I'm not really a big fan of Preserver. I don't really think it does enough in this type of deck. We are going to put it in just because it might get the utility slot, but more than likely we'll immediately take it out. Now, Taunting Elf's a pretty cool card because it gives it lure ability, but frankly, it doesn't do enough. Timberwatch Elf, on the other hand, does a lot. 2 and a green, tap it, target creature gets +X/+X until end of turn or X number of elves in the battlefield. Broke a limited format on its own, still good in EDH, lets us keep specific cards, and overall is just a fantastic spell. Tribal Force Mage is really cool. The problem is you only get that momentary boost once, but the trample is really powerful. So we are going to consider Tribal Force Mage. Another card to consider is Felonite Hermit. The same reason why we would play a card like Deranged Hermit is the reason why we play Felonite Hermit. We can morph it, then unmorph it for 3 double green to put 4 saplings out of the battlefield. We're going to be playing a lot of cards that give just straight green creatures +1/+1. Case in point. Case in point, Kesa. I like that. So expect Felonite Hermit to maybe make the deck, but it would still be a maybe. We're almost out of elves, which is good because we already have 46 cards. We need to play some non-creature spells in this deck. A lot of people play Viridian Corruptor. It's an end of the battlefield destroy target artifact card. It is an infector, but I do agree with the people that play it. I think this card is actually rather strong. It's a Viridian Shaman, but with infect, and we can really take the green, and it lets us soften up larger creatures. I think we're also going to add Viridian Shaman. It also destroys target artifacts, and right about here, I think we're almost good on killing our artifacts. We have Glissa, Shaman, and Corruptor, and then we also have our 2/4 to just machine gun down any green spells, which is perfect. Viridian Zealot, double green for a 2/1. You can pay 1 green to target artifact or enchantment. We may play it, but more than likely we might not. Wool Leaf Liege is a reason to go into green-white with this type of deck. It gives our green and white creatures +1/+1, but for us, we're not really going to put it in. Now, Voice of the Woods is cool. This is the type of spell that you really want on your top end. For 3 double green, you could tap 5 untapped elves you control to put a 7/7 green elemental creature token with trample onto the battlefield. Trample is super important, but especially at 5, if you look at our current curve, like I'll even go to the stats section, which is very important for MTGO, you'll notice that our curve is beautiful. Our average cost is 3, so we may even have 5 elves by the time this Voice of the Woods hits. We are going to play Well-Wisher just because it's the best way to make your opponents hate you. You gain way too much life, and you become a hard to deal with threat. Yeva will also make the deck, but we'll put her into the sideboard in case we want to choose her as our general. And the last card I really want to add in is, excuse me while I take a breath. Whew. I really like Wirewood Herald. 1 and a green, when this guy dies, you may search a library for an elf card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and shuffle your library. It becomes a card that your opponents just really can't kill. We'll also add in Wood Elves to add more lands into this deck, which is great. I don't really want to add in Wolfskull Shaman because it's never really performed for me. Neither will I add in Renswin Packmaster. Now these cards are great. Now, just a really quick key, because it's a common card I see in elf decks that I really disagree with, and that's Ambush Commander. It looks cool. 3 double green, force you control our 1/1 green elf creature tokens, elf creatures that are still lands. You can pay 1 and a green to sack an elf to give to our creature +2/+3 until end of turn. It's a 2/2. The problem with Ambush Commander is that it makes all of your lands into creatures. When your opponent Wrath of Gods, which will happen because you're playing an elf deck, you no longer have lands to get back into the game, and that's horrible. Now, we have 53 cards in here already. We already know some cards we're definitely probably going to cut, but we still have to go. We're not stopping here. We have 53 cards. We're not even at a land limit yet. So what we're going to do is we have pretty much all of our creatures. Let's get all those support cards. So I kept mentioning it, and I kept mentioning it. And we are playing a tribal deck. So the first cards I really want to put into this deck are cards that really unite that tribal unity. One of those cards is Adaptive Automaton. 3 mana, choose a creature type. We're going to choose elves. Other creatures of the chosen type get +1/+1. Another card that I really want to do for a general tribal archetype is Door of Destinies. It'll do the same exact ability. As enters battlefield, choose a creature type. Whenever you cast a spell of the chosen type, put a charge counter Door of Destinies. Creatures get really big really quickly. With these 2 cards, both of which will make the deck, I think we're actually good on Lords, which is great for us. Now, I kept mentioning we're going to make green creatures big, we're going to make green creatures big, we're going to make green creatures big, and I wasn't lying to you either. And we're going to do it in 2 different ways. One of the ways is Cage Sun. Cage Sun for 6 mana is a great card from MPH, not Neil Patrick Harris, but of course, New Phyrexia. As Cage Sun enters the battlefield, choose a color. Creatures you control of the chosen color get +1/+1, and whenever a land's ability adds 1 or more mana of the chosen color to your mana pool, add 1 additional mana of that color to your mana pool. And to go with that, we're going to play Gauntlet of Power. I spelled Gauntlet wrong. That happens sometimes. Gauntlet of Power is going to give us a similar ability for 5 mana. We choose a color, except it's asymmetrical ability. Creatures chosen color get +1/+1, and whenever basic land is tapped for mana of the chosen color, its controller adds 1 mana of that color to their mana pool. Right now we're at 57, and we're still not stopping here. So even though a lot of our elves give us lands, we still need a couple of specific cards to make sure that we always hit our land drops and are always able to get above a 4 land threshold. So I want to add in both Cultivate and Kadama's Reach. They both do the same exact thing, but they both do it so well that we want to add it in. There we go. Now looking at our deck as it's currently built, I'm going to hit the stats section again, and you'll once again notice, like, man, this mana curve is beautiful. But I still think we can make our creatures bigger and better. We're playing a lot of 1/1s, a lot of 1/2s, a lot of 2/1s, and that's not going to get it done in EDH. When I mentioned we're going to keep getting wraths, I wasn't kidding. We're going to keep getting wraths. So I want to play 2 cards that are going to. I want to play some cards that'll let us get those cards. That'll let us get those creatures out of the graveyard and back into our hand. One of those is Creeping Renaissance. For 3 double green, we choose a permanent type. Return all cards of the chosen type from our graveyard to the hand. The other one is. I was just trying to make sure I spelled this right. Praetor's Council. It's a little bit of an expensive card, but we're playing some specific cards that get us up this high. 5 triple green, return all cards from our graveyard to our hand. Exile this, you have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. So these are 2 ways to get those creatures out of our graveyard when they get wrathed away. Super important. Now another very important card is, although we're playing cards like Door of Destinies and Adaptive Automaton and Gauntlet of Power, sometimes that's not big enough. Sometimes you need to keep going and be, I'm not going to say evasive, but just kill people. A Chronos Memorial is great for that. 7 mana for a recent Mythic Rare, reprinted in M13. Creatures we control have Flying, First Strike, Vigilance, Trample, Haste, and Prot Black, Prot Red. Make sure that our creatures can't be killed by Blasphemous Act, makes them a lot stronger and get through a lot quicker. The same exact idea is going to come through from Eldrazi Monument. This is going to give our creatures evasion and make them flying and indestructible. At the beginning of our upkeep, we have to sack a creature, otherwise we sack Eldrazi Monument. The thing about it is, not only is this card amazing, but we're going to be making a lot of tokens in a deck like this, so Eldrazi Monument is what we're actually looking for. And there is, of course, one last card I really want to add into here. It's Beastmaster Ascension. Oh, I clicked Beast. That was the wrong part. Beastmaster's Ascension for 2 and a green. Whenever a creature we control attacks, we get to put a quest counter onto Beastmaster's Ascension. As long as there's 7 or more quest counters on a creature you control, go +5/+5. Now, a lot of our creatures don't come with trample, but they're going to get really big, so I want to have global ways to give those creatures trample. Just like Azuri that gives us the overrun effect, we do want to play other overrun type effects. Now, one of them is literally going to be overrun. You know what? That's not how you spell overrun. This is how you spell overrun. That's how you spell over, not overrun. We're going to be playing both Overwhelming Stampede and actual Overrun. I want to get the correct art for Overrun, though, because, I mean, got to get the correct art for it. Come on. Perfect. The Jeff Miracle art. Alright, now we'll stop showing all the versions. And then let's take a long look at our deck and see where we're at with it. So we have a huge amount of elves that are going to help us a lot. We have a lot of elves that give us extra mana. We have a lot of elves that draw us a couple of cards. So when I look at an EDH deck, especially at this point when we're going strategy up, I want to make sure we didn't miss specific things that you just need in an EDH deck. And one of the first ones is lands. Let's double check lands. It shouldn't be that hard. Wood Elves, Tree Speaker, Heritage Druid, Findhorn, Mystic, Arbor Elf. We're almost reaching 8 already, and we're only through 1-drops. Warden, Priest of Titania, Raphellos. Oh, we're good. So I'm going to stop here. We definitely have enough ways to make sure that we're not messed up on lands at any time in the game, as well as ways to permanently put ways to ramp up our mana on the battlefield. Perfect. Now let's look for card draw, because card draw, even if we're playing green, is still very important, and in fact, maybe more important. So how are we getting extra cards into our hand? Whether it be a card like Sylvan Messenger, or a card like Elvish Visionary, Multani's Acolyte, Oracle of Moldiah, and of course the incomparable Masked Admirers. Looking at these 5 cards, I actually want more ways to put more cards into my hand. I think it's going to be very important, especially for a deck like this that's focused on a tribal strategy, to really, again, not fall behind those controlling Grixis or Esper deck. So one of the best ways is to steal their own spell. Let's grab a Harmonize, a color-shifted version of Concentrate. That's what I mean by that, of course. And then I wouldn't mind having one more way to draw additional cards. Now, we're going to be playing so many elves and so many creatures. I kind of want to interact with that really well. One of the best ways to actually do that is either by doing a strategy like Birthing Pod, which when those creatures enter the battlefield, we keep going up a chain until we get to a point where we overrun them. Or we could play a card which I think may be a little bit better. That's going to be Primordial Sage. Primordial Sage for 4 double green. Whenever we cast a creature spell, you may draw a card. We're going to be definitely going for this type of build. So we're going to be playing so many creatures. When we turn our creatures into extra cards, it just gets a little bit better for us. Yeah, that's pretty much what I'm looking at. Now, we're at 69 here. I really don't want to go the Birthing Pod route. We have a lot of creatures that enter the battlefield and give us abilities, but we can't go that high up the chain is the main problem. Once we get to 5, we're done. Like, we have a 6, and then it's over. Birthing Pod is a very cute card, and it's definitely a card that could be good in this type of deck. I'm just not feeling it, so we're not going to be playing the Birthing Pod. I instead like cards like Primordial Sage. I think this will be better. Now, you'll notice that there is a card from Affixing Restore that does the same ability. I don't know what it is off the top of my head. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use MTGO to find that card. So when I look at Primordial Sage, it says whenever I cast a creature spell, I can draw a card. I know the other one is whenever a creature enters the battlefield. So what I'm going to do is into the search bar. So into the search bar, I'm just going to put creature, enter. And we have a lot of interesting things like fading that comes up. We're not looking for fading. We're looking for Soul of the Harvest. So you'll notice its text says, whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. A perfect accompaniment with Primordial Sage. Now, we could go Wild Pair for this type of deck. Wild Pair is very good at getting like creatures out of your deck. Because our creatures are going to become so big so quickly, it's actually going to trigger incorrectly, and it's not going to be that great for us. So that's always kind of disappointing, but we still want to be conscious of it. Now, there is one more card I want to put into here. We're going to be making a lot of really big creatures very quickly, and one of the things I do want to do is add an equipment. I think the basic one is Luxodon Warhammer. Luxodon Warhammer is going to give our huge creatures trample and lifelink. It's a good way to not only get our huge creatures through, which they're going to get big very quickly, but it's a great way to make sure we gain some life, get some extra utility out of it, and just win the game off of it. So looking at our deck, we have at least 10 slots devoted to getting more lands into play. We have at least 8 slots devoted to getting more cards into our hand, either from the graveyard or from our deck. We have multiple ways to make our creatures bigger. So we have a single problem. We're at 72 cards in our from the ground up tribal strategy. And that's always a problem because, hey, we're not playing 20-ish lands. That's not a good thing for us. So looking at our deck, I mentioned this a lot while we were building it. A lot of these one-drop elves, like Findhorn, Heritage Druid, and Arbor Elf are all going to come out of the deck immediately. We don't need that many 1-drops because we don't have many ways to capitalize on those 1-drops. And we have a lot of cards that just give us mana in such larger ways. Now we're looking to play Nissa's Chosen explicitly for Nissa Ravane. Otherwise, I'd immediately cut it because it's an Elvish Warrior. Now as I look through the deck fully, some of the things that really pop out as far as cuts. Again, we're only trying to get to 60 cards in the deck, so we can put 39 lands in. We're at 69 right now. We may actually... We'll play 38 lands. Yeah, we'll play 38 lands. So we need to cut 8 cards out of the stack. Pretty simple. Let's look at the cards that do the least, I think is the best way to put it. I'm looking for impactful cards. When they hit the battlefield, they're either very important. A good way is giving our creatures Forest Walking Shroud. Elvish Vanguard, again, as we mentioned when we first pulled them, it's a card that, even though it interacts very well with the token strategy, we're not playing enough tokens to really take advantage of it, so we're going to take it out. The same thing with Elvish Aberration. Even though it has a forward cycling ability, the triple green later on in the game isn't that important, so we're also going to grab him out of the deck. I really like having this suite of... 5 cards that really just allow us to overrun our opponents whenever we want, especially since one of them is overrun. So we're probably not touching any of these cards. As I look further through these, through our 4-drops, and we really start getting to the nitty-gritty, we could never cut Skystrap Poacher. It's pretty much impossible to do. This is actually pretty difficult. What cards are we going to cut? I don't want to keep cutting ways to get lands out of our deck. I think that's a good way to make sure that we just get screwed over. We'll take out Tribal Force Mage. It's a worse overrun in our deck. It comes down as a morph. It costs 5 mana to use anyways. We'll take him out. Tajura Preserver, also not going to make the cut. I'm not that worried about sacrifice effects in this type of build. He comes out as well. Multani's Acolyte's a card we mentioned. It enters the battlefield, draws a card. That's all it does. I know it gets us, it accelerates us through our deck pretty quickly. The double green isn't going to be a problem for our deck, but I just don't feel it being a great card for our deck. Same with Gaia's Herald. Our cards are so our cards are so similar, and they have such similar effects that Gaia's Herald is the type of card that doesn't really produce a remarkable. I can't say effect again. It's not remarkable on the battlefield, even though it makes sure that all creature spells can't be countered. If our creature spells get countered, we play a card that's exactly the same to it. So Gaia's Herald is the kind of card that we don't really need for this type of build. I like how we're keeping Elvish Visionary, but we didn't keep the Acolyte. The simple reason is it's just easier to cast, and it doesn't have Echo. I don't have to pay 4 mana for that card. Looking at Draco Speaker, even though it lets us... Sorry, Draco... Where is this guy? Elvish Skysweeper might be the last cut. Let's double check. We're going to go to Piles by CMC one more time. Just make sure our CMC looks good. Let's look at our stats. Our average converted mana cost is 3.5 in an elf deck. That's okay. I like a lot of these abilities. I like that a lot of these cards just allow us to do more than just being an elf. The last thing we want to do is have a card that just says, hey, I'm an elf. Put me in the deck. And I think... no, we have so many ways to utilize those tokens. Monument, Gauntlet, Cage Sun, Memorial. I just can't take out Hermit. I think the last card we're looking to take out is probably just going to be Corruptor. The reason why I don't want to play Corruptor is, to put it very simply, Infect is scary, and I don't want our opponents to think that we're going to be trying to infect them out. Even though it has a very good ability to string an artifact when it comes into play, we have a lot of other cards that take that ability, so we can take it out. So looking at our deck, we're at 62 cards. We'll be able to play 37 lands in this type of build. So we're playing so many cards that accelerate us in lands, especially from a creature side. We don't really need to focus that hard on it. We have Cultivate and Kodama's Reach as well. We have a lot of cards that draw us extra cards, which is perfect, and actually get cards out of different places in our deck. A card like Primordial Sage and Soul of the Hearts will draw us a lot of cards. Praetor's Council gets out of our graveyard, so does Creeping Renaissance, and we have a lot of cards that search for specific elves, which is also very important. Looking at this deck, we also have a lot of ways to get rid of artifacts and enchantments. Problematic artifacts and enchantments can kill a deck like this. Just kill it dead immediately. I do actually want at least 2 ways to destroy lands, and we're actually going to pick that up in our land slot. Let's go to it right now. So we're playing 62. We'll be playing 37 lands. Now, sadly, there isn't a way to just say, I only want green color-producing lands in your land slot. You do have to go through them. I will go to my cards here. A lot of the cards that I don't own aren't really that playable. Actually, we do need Wirewood Lodge, so I will go to... There we go. I didn't have that, so I had to grab that before we go through. Now, there's a lot of cards I really want in this type of deck. One of the most important is, of course, Forest. Now... Sorry, that's obviously, that's apparently obvious. Now, when I go through lands, especially for an EDH deck, I make sure I take my time and just... There's a lot of utility you can get out of lands. A card like Contested Warzone could be great in an aggressive deck. We're not that deck. I really don't want to lose lands in this type of build. Evolving Wilds, great in a different style of in a multicolored deck, not in ours. I'd love to play Gavany Township, and actually is a reason to go for the green-white version of this deck. Township just allows you to make your guys bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, which is something you want to do. Now, looking through this, we aren't a Maze of Ith deck. We aren't trying to prevent combat damage from a single creature. Even though it's really good against a deck like Rafik, it's not something we're looking to do. Mosswort Bridge is actually playable in this deck, and is something we're going to want to do. It's another way to get extra cards on the battlefield, get an extra utility out of our land slot, which is something that's very hard to do. It's a hideaway land. We can pay green, tap it to play the exiled card without paying its mana cost if we control creatures with power 10 or greater. Again, we're still going from the strategy up, not from the general down. Orinreath, the Vastwood, perfect for this deck. We can tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on each green creature that enters the battlefield this turn. The reason to go for the blue-green deck is because of Novaige and Heart of Progress. Does the same ability. Nykthos is a card I'm going to like. It's like Gaia's Cradle, but not insanely expensive, which is perfect. It's always nice to have a not incredibly expensive Gaia's Cradle. It's the bee's knees. Looking through this deck, Reliquary Tower isn't a card I really... It brings some utility in being a free spellbook. just because of land slot. We're playing so many green intensive cards. I don't want to play too many spells that are colorless. We're going to be playing 2 more, I know, so we're not going to really add this guy in. We are going to add in, where you at, Strip Mine? You are going to add in both Strip Mine and Tectonic Edge. The reason why is because of a card we just added in, which is Nykthos Shrine Nyx. One of the reasons why Mono Black has been so strong in the format for so long is because of its access and not being punished for playing so many amazing non-basics in, well, Cabal Coffers and Nykthos. Now that Nykthos has been printed, you need to be able to destroy those non-basics. Cards like Maze of Ith can't just be let to go astray. Strip Mine and Tectonic Edge are 2 of the best ways to get rid of those cards. Ghost Quarter a close second, but we don't want to play too many colorless effects in our deck. All the reason why we didn't play Maze of Ith is because we need to have lands. Now, I'm debating the cycling lands. We will get to a point in this game where we don't really need lands in the battlefield. Slippery Karst is one of the ways to do that, and I think it will deserve an inclusion in this build. As we go further down, Treetop Village is a man land, but I think we just want Tranquil Ticket. Again, more cycling just gets us in the right mindset for this type of deck. Yavimaya Hollow is very interesting. I like this card a lot better when we play cards that we need on the battlefield at all times, especially when it's general focus. A card like Kresh or Rafik really love Yavimaya Hollow. I don't think we're a Yavimaya Hollow deck. We are a Winding Canyons deck, though. Winding Canyons for 2 mana. It's a land from Weatherlight. You can tap that 1 to your mana pool. For 2, you can tap it until end of turn. You may play creature cards with that flash. The same ability from Yeva, but on a land. Absolutely perfect. And the last thing we're going to do is we're going to show all versions. We're going to add in some good old Zendikar Forest into our elf deck. Let's do so. We should probably not scroll under F, because that's where the forests are. And boom! That is our build. So you'll notice that we went from the ground up. We took our strategy first, and we built around our strategy, and then built a EDH deck from it. We still subscribe to some of the core tenets of EDH deck building. We have at least 8 ways to get extra mana onto the battlefield. We have at least 8 ways to draw extra cards. We have ways to deal with problematic artifacts, enchantments, and lands. And we have ways to win the game, which is super important. It's not that hard to do in an elf deck, to be fair, but Jesus Christ, please make sure you can win the game. Just because you can't lose the game doesn't mean you can win. Doesn't mean you can win the game. We have a lot of ways to get through as well. One of the most important things to do is that Chroma's Memorial and Eldrazi Monument allow us to get through problematic defenders, whether it be a Serene Master or a Wall of Glare. Eldrazi Monument and Chroma's Memorial make sure we can fly over that. Looking at the deck, I really like where it's at. This is I'm going to say it's a stock elf list, but we built it from the ground up, and that's how you build those type of lists. We did settle on a Zuri Renegade Leader. I do want to kind of talk about him more. You notice that, again, we went elf up. We took all of our elves, and then we chose our general later. And in fact, just so that I can show you that general picking process, that's kind of a weird way to put it, we're going to pretend we didn't pick a Zuri already. So what I did here was in MTGO, I typed in legendary into the search bar and then made sure we just picked creatures. And now we're going to look through the creatures to decide what kind of general do we want. Now, when looking at our deck, we still want the ability to get through very easily, as well as interact with our elf creature type. One of the ways to get through is Barufis Akroza. Whenever a forest enters the battlefield, green creatures we control get +1/+1 and gain trample. Not that bad. We will hit off of... Oh no. Stop that. There we go. Dosen is good if we were expecting a control-heavy metagame. Eladamari, Lord of Leaves, already in our deck, but again, a good type. Giving our creatures Forest Walk and Shroud is a great way to get through our opponents. Zuri Renegade Leader, going to give all our elf creatures trample. We are going for a mono-green, more aggressive deck, so we're looking for generals that really focus on that ability. Kamalfis Akroza, again, attached with that overrun ability, a very strong choice for this type of build. Omnath, Lord of Mana, Nylea, Goddess of the Hunt and Patron of the Irachi, also all great ideas for this type of build. This is actually a pretty cool card. Menghuo, Barbarian King. Other green creatures you control get +1/+1. Kind of like Kesa, but it's a 4/4 instead of a 2/3. Rice the Exiled cannot be played because it has a black mana symbol in its mana cost. So that's a sad part. Dorfellows is currently banned, otherwise we probably would play it. It's that good. Shashira is devoted to strictly for snakes, and Yeva would probably be our last consideration for an elf deck. Looking at all these cards, we have 9 different generals to pick from, and we can take some out pretty quickly. We're not an Omnath deck. Even though we can ramp a lot of mana into Omnath, Omnath deserves a build deck around him, and we are not built around Omnath. Beru, although it gives us that +1/+1, doesn't compare to our overrun effects from Missouri or Kamal, so he'll also leave. Trample is very powerful, but 4 mana to give a single creature +2/+2 is not what we're looking for. Patron of the Urachi is actually a very interesting choice. We're going to tap all forest and all green creatures. Lets us really play on our opponent's turn with cards like Well-Wisher or Timberwatch Elf or Immaculate Magistrate. It's an interesting idea, but not something we're looking for. Again, that +1/+1 not good enough. So we have utility, overrun, and utility. We have 3 elves and 1 non-elf. Oh, Kamal. He goes out. So we have an elf, an elf, and an elf, which is perfect. Now, the cool part about Yeva is if we have a lot of enter the battlefield abilities, we can really take advantage of this type of build and really utilize her to scare our opponent out of nowhere. Briarhorn, boom! But that's not this deck. So now we're down to Illidanri and Azuri Renegade Leader, and although Forest Walk is very powerful and other elves have Shroud is very powerful, it means that our opponents really can't interact with our deck, and that if they have Forest, they're just dead. I'd rather just have this in our deck instead of as a general. Being able to search this out of nowhere without our opponents expecting it is a very good way to basically kill them out of nowhere. So I think Illidanri just belongs better in the deck, and by process of elimination, and also by being amazing, Azuri is going to be our general for this from the strategy up. Built EDH deck. Again, the ability to give all of our elves trample and +3/+3, as well as playing green to regenerate another target elf. Very powerful, very interactive with the other elves in our deck, and that trample is what's going to sell it. Being able to give those elves +3/+3 and trample is very powerful. Even though we are playing both Deranged Hermit and Felonite Hermit, Azuri is not going to ramp up those creatures, but the elves on the inside will still do very well. And that's about it. This is how I would build an EDH deck from the ground up. And as you notice, even though I knew a lot of the cards I wanted for some of those decks, if you wanted to build it from the ground up yourself and didn't really know what you wanted to do, a good example is, oh, I want to build a Minotaur deck. Using MTGO, it's actually very easy to build that type of deck. All you have to do is use the search function. You can find pretty much everything you need. A lot of those cards I kind of just knew from playing the format so much, but the deck is rather simple. That being said, it's still very strong. I'd expect this deck to win almost every single game it's played in. The fact is, the tribal archetype is very good, unless it gets Wrath out of existence. That's why we're playing both Praetor's Council and Creepy Renaissance, to mitigate that ability. I'd like to say thank you so much for tuning into part 1 of building each deck. This one is from the ground up, as in from the strategy up. We chose elves as our strategy, and you can pretty much do this with any strategy. Whether it be flicker, or life gain, or counters, or tokens, or heck, you can even make a Minotaur deck. Anything is possible in EDH, and you should pretty much figure it out that way. So once again, thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you liked this glimpse into deck building as far as how I build EDH decks. This, I would say, is the best way if I was a beginner to build an EDH deck is from the strategy up. The next video will be going from the commander down as far as building an EDH deck. We're going to follow a couple of those similar tenets. One being we want probably at least 8, if not 7, ways to increase our mana, or at least fix our mana. We want at least 6 ways to draw additional cards, whether it be from our deck, from our graveyard, or heck, even from our hand. I don't know how we do that one, but that'd be pretty cool. And we want ways to deal with problematic artifacts, enchantments, or lands. Some decks can't do that. Looking at you, Mono Black, but you need ways to get rid of that, and that's when we really turn to artifacts to get over that hump. And then finally, you need ways to win the game. There's a lot of ways out there in Magic to not lose the game, but if you don't have a way to win the game, you can't actually win the game. It's that simple. What I mean by that is, if that may have sounded confusing, a lot of players play cards like Ghostly Prison or the Pillow Fort type of deck, or cards like Propaganda that prevent your opponents from attacking. You just get to live longer. You need ways to win the game after that. Don't expect to win the game off of a 3/2 Delver of Secrets in EDH. It's not going to get there. So, thank you so much for stopping by. It was such a great time to have you, and I hope you learned something. If you didn't learn anything, that's a definite possibility. I will include the list for this deck in the comments. In the description, if you want to look over it on your own. If you have any cards that I may have missed, or if you have any other ways you build your own decks, please drop it in the comments as well. And for the third time, thank you for tuning in.